Okay. So again, thanks for coming to the last session of the spring course, the English Dharma course. As I said, I'm not sure if we'll do this again in the summer. I don't know if I'll be here, but I'll be back in the fall. So we'll definitely start again in the fall for another 10 weeks. I'll let you know what the plan is as soon as I can. So today, as I emailed to you a couple of days ago, I'll be talking about what makes a precious human life. And so when we talk about this, we talk about the 8 leisures and the 10 endowments. So leisure means, the ability to relax. But here we're talking about things that we are free from, difficulties that we are free from for these 8 things. So to have the 8 leisures, we're free from being born as. We are not born as a hell being, because hell beings cannot practice the Dharma. They are too overwhelmed with fear and pain and suffering. Imagine the worst time of your life, and all you can see, all you can think about is that suffering that you're experiencing right in that moment. It's like you have blinders on. You can't see anything past your own suffering. Now imagine that times 1 million or more. That is what beings in the hell realms are going through. And so they are unable to focus on anything beyond that immediate moment of suffering. So if you're born in the hell realm, you can't practice Dharma. Now, hungry ghosts aren't suffering quite as bad as the hell beings, but they are also too overwhelmed with suffering. There are different stories, different kinds of hungry ghosts. Some of them, when they put food in their mouth, it turns to ash. Or their throats are extremely thin, and so anything they put in their mouth, it won't go down. Or they put food in their mouth and it turns to hot coals and burns them, right? So, and they're too caught up with the hunger that they feel. That's why we call them hungry ghosts. They can't really focus on the Dharma. I actually heard or read a story some time ago about, I don't quite remember the details, but someone, maybe it was a monk, somehow was able to see, or he came upon this temple. And he went inside and he saw these monks sitting in their fine robes, and they were eating. But then the hour changed. I think it changed to nighttime, and then they became these horrible demons who were fighting over the food and throwing it at one another, but fighting over the food and trying to feed themselves. And it was because they had wasted the offerings of donors in their previous lifetime as monks, and so then they were suffering as beings kind of like hungry ghosts, not exactly. So you probably know many of these stories, many more than I do, particularly from the Vietnamese tradition. And animals are overwhelmed with ignorance. Sometimes, I've mentioned this before, I think, and you've probably seen this too. You'll find a video or a picture on the internet, and it'll be some cute little dog who wanders into a temple, and he sees the monks bowing every day, like we do here, and so then the dog will start to bow. Or if you go, there's a temple in Japan, in the city of Nara. They have one of the 2 so-called great Buddhas, these giant Buddhas. And there's a park in front of the temple where deer roam around. You know what I'm talking about because you lived in Japan, right? So, and you can buy these biscuits, these little cookies, to feed them. Well, the deer have learned, because Japanese people, not just in temples, but in regular life, right, they bow a lot. So the deer will walk up to you and they'll go, they bow their heads, they sort of wobble a little bit because they have horns even, right? They'll bow their heads and they want you to feed them. In fact, if you're eating food, you have to be careful that the deer don't come up behind you, because sometimes they'll just stick their faces in your food. So I was eating lunch there one time, and I had to turn to the deer and say, "No!" And they stopped, and they bowed. I'm like, "No!" So anyway, so here they are. They're around this temple, and they've learned to sort of move their heads, but that's not out of any real intelligence, the kind of intelligence needed to pursue the Dharma. Although it's also said that it's really good to chant mantras for animals, particularly animals who are dying. So Karuna, for example, can't understand, the cat here can't understand anything that we're chanting, but yet Karuna has a mind like we have a mind. And so there's some sort of impression being made, being around monastics, being around the chanting of the Buddha's teachings and so on. And so that's a good thing. But Karuna cannot join us in our class and study sutras and the teachings of the Buddha. So then we're also free from being born as a demi-god, the so-called asura. These are the fighting gods or the jealous gods. They have different names. These are the lower gods. So throughout all the god realms, there's supposedly this tree growing. And the higher gods get to enjoy the fruit from the tree, and the lower gods have to work to take care of the tree. And so every now and then they get fed up with having to do all the work, and they attack the higher gods. This is why they're sometimes called the fighting gods. They never win, because it's their karma to be in this realm. These are the lower god realms. So they're too caught up in their pride and their jealousy. Even though they had the karma to be reborn in a god realm that is materially speaking nicer than ours, because of the generosity they engaged in the past, they're really too caught up with their pride and jealousy. And so sometimes in the god realms, particularly the higher god realms, they will invite Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to teach. But because they enjoy such a wonderful experience materially, they don't really have any motivation to really practice. And so they hear these Dharma teachings, but they waste the opportunity more than humans do. So that's the same thing for the higher gods. That takes care of both the demigods and the higher gods. And so then we're free from being born as one with incomplete sensory faculties or serious mental disability. So incomplete sensory faculties means you're free from being born blind, mute, deaf, and so on. Now, in modern America, that sounds discriminatory. But think about this 2,500 years ago. They probably didn't have sign language, almost certainly didn't have Braille, definitely. I think we can say they didn't have Braille. People just didn't have access to the teachings. If you couldn't see and you couldn't hear, particularly if you couldn't hear, you didn't really have full access to the teachings. Even today in modern America, I think it's safe to say that all the Dharma videos that are out there, probably only a small portion have that little window in the corner of the video with someone doing sign language or has subtitles. And Dharma books, there's probably very few Dharma books available in Braille. So there's more access today, but even less so back then. But even today, it's not complete. So in other words, you don't have any sort of physical or mental obstacles to having full access to the Dharma. All right, that's what number 6 is about. The next one's a little funny. So you're free from being born as one who has not been born in a barbarian land. I worded that poorly. So one who has not been born in a barbarian land. Now, when I think barbarians, I think of like guys with metal helmets and bear skins and swords riding on horses. But really what we're talking about here is a land that does not have the Dharma. So you're not born in a place without the Dharma. Now, when we say, sometimes we say the word country comes up in relation to this, but we're not talking about a nation state. So we can say, in general, in America, there are places where the Dharma is available and places where it is not. I grew up in a small town in Illinois, and I was really interested in Buddhism, but there were no Buddhists around. There were no Buddhist teachers, no temples, nothing. My only access to Buddhism was through books available in like the local shopping mall bookstore. We didn't have big bookstores like Barnes & Noble or whatever back then. There were just a few books available. So I would pick one up every now and then and read. But that was my only access. So I was really limited in my ability, because of my karma, to fully access the Dharma again. And then the last one here of the 8 leisures, you're free from being born as one who holds sorry, I worded this one poorly too. So you're free from being born as one who holds views against the three jewels. So if somebody has a really strong aversion to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, they're just going to walk away from it, right? So then they can't really be helped by the Buddha's teachings. If someone hears it and they go, no, talking about the Four Noble Truths as they're walking away is not going to help, right? So when we are free from these conditions, then we can say that we have the 8 leisures. And then there are the 10 endowments. 10 endowments are things that we want to have. So first, one was born in a human body. So it's, if we look above, hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, demigods, and the higher gods. Really, those realms of existence, being born there, that's not good for studying the Dharma. So you're born as a human being. In the Mahayana tradition in particular, we say it's only as a human being that we have the right mixture of suffering and freedom from suffering, so that we can concentrate it all on the Dharma. So we have just enough suffering to motivate us. We understand suffering. But then generally speaking, we're not constantly overwhelmed with suffering or material wealth. We're not so overwhelmed with material wealth that, that we can't pursue the Dharma. So we're born as a human being. And then we're born in a region in which the Buddhist teachings are accessible. So you could say modern Los Angeles would be such a place. And other parts of this country and other parts of the world. Some places, not so much. And then one has intact sensory organs and a sound mind. So this is the opposite of the one above, about having incomplete sensory faculties. So we have no physical or mental obstacles ourselves to studying the Dharma. And then we also don't have false views. So if you're really, we all have false views because we're ignorant, right? But with this one, we are not strongly attached to, say, for example, the idea that the only way to be happy is through Jesus and to be reborn in heaven. Now, there's nothing wrong with being Christian. I'm not knocking Christians. But in terms of pursuing the Dharma, if you're really attached to this other religious idea and this idea that there's one life on earth and then you're reborn in this heavenly realm, well, you're just not going to pursue the Dharma, right? Or if you're really strongly attached to other ideas that are the opposite of the Dharma. You hear the Dharma, it's like, it'll be like, throwing food at a brick wall. I mean, it won't help. And then you have a natural trust in the Dharma. So then not only do you not have false views, you have a natural trust in the Dharma. So I was fortunate. So I wasn't born in a place where I had access to the Buddha's teachings, or at least easy access to the Buddha's teachings, but I had this natural interest in the Dharma, and that led me to keep pursuing it until I did have an opportunity to have access. Okay. And then the next one was born in a time when a Buddha has appeared in the world. Now, the best karma in this regard would be to have been born 2,600 years ago in North India with the Buddha, right? But we still say that this is a time in which a Buddha has been born, because the Buddha taught and we still have access to his teachings. Okay, so a Buddha appeared in the world. We know about him and all of that. So, and that Buddha did teach the Dharma, because not all Buddhas teach. Remember, even Shakyamuni Buddha, after he first became enlightened, at first he wasn't going to teach. And then it was one of the gods who came and said, you really need to teach. And finally he said, okay. So some Buddhas don't teach. So a Buddha has been born in the world, and then that Buddha has taught the Dharma. And then these teachings have been preserved and are still accessible to us. So they haven't died out yet. And then one understands and practices these teachings. So sure, there are lots of people who read Buddhist books, but they never do anything about it. So one of the endowments is to have the interest and the habit of studying and practicing the Buddhist teachings. And then there are those who lovingly support practitioners. So all of us here at this temple, we can say support one another in our practice of the Dharma. Right? If you have lots of interest in the Dharma and you read lots of Dharma books, but you're off by yourself somewhere and you don't have anyone to ask questions of, you don't have Dharma friends. Remember I talked before about how the Buddha said that even more important than the teacher-disciple relationship is the relationship, the sort of lateral relationship between Dharma brothers and sisters, right? So if you don't have that, well, that's really an obstacle to your fully pursuing the Dharma. Now, there's another way of looking at this last one, too. Some people say this refers to specifically to monks and nuns, and then having people to support them in retreat, in study and retreat and that sort of thing. But I think we can think of this more broadly as well. So these are the 8 leisures and the 10 endowments. So we want to be free from the first 8, and we want to have then the 10 endowments. And this is what constitutes a precious human life. Of course, as I always say when I talk about this, all life is precious. All life is precious, but this is a technical term in the Dharma. Now, this isn't just a list of things to know. This is actually a tool that we can use in meditation. I remember before, was it you who asked about contemplative meditation, like you were thinking during meditation? So there's the kind of meditation that we've been doing here where we're simply trying to quiet and focus the mind. But once we've developed more quiet and focus, then we can use this as a form of meditation. So then you sit, you memorize this list, you've got it memorized, and then you sit, and you're like, okay, well, am I a hell being? Nope. I'm not a hungry ghost, and so on. And you go through this list in your mind, and you say, am I free from these 8 things? And you go through each one of the 8 things. Yes, I am free from these eight problems. And then you go through the list of the 10 endowments. Do I have all of these 10 endowments? You go through each of them, and you think about it, and you think about how you have these endowments, right? Exactly in what way you have these endowments. And then the idea with this is to remind ourselves that a precious human life is incredibly rare. It's incredibly rare. They say that achieving a precious human rebirth is as common as a giant turtle that is blind, who lives beneath the ocean, rising to the surface of this huge ocean on which a ring is floating, right? So every I think it's every 100 years or something, this turtle supposedly rises, and the chance of having a human rebirth is the same as the chance of that giant blind turtle to randomly stick its head through that ring floating on the surface of the ocean. Have you heard this before? Some of you? Okay. So think how likely is that to happen, for that turtle to put its head through the ring randomly? That is how likely we are to achieve a truly perfectly precious human rebirth. So knowing this, reminding ourselves of this, and the fact that we have a precious human rebirth is motivation for us to learn and practice the Dharma more. So this is the purpose of this teaching. So let me ask then, are there any questions? I know this is a pretty straightforward list, but if you have questions about this or anything else, please go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Maybe this is a more personal thing, but how did you, you said that you grew up in a small town in Illinois. Mm-hmm. How did you know that you have a natural trust in Dharma? Like, when and how did you acknowledge and realize that?
Okay, so since I grew up in a small town, how did I know that I had this natural affinity for the Dharma? Well, at first I didn't. And at some point, though, I must have come across some mention of Buddha or Buddhism or something. Because when I was about 12 years old, I found a 1960s world religions textbook on my father's bookshelf. And I pulled it down, and I immediately turned to the section on Buddhism. I don't remember why, but that was the first thing that drew me in. And that was the first time that I read about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And my eyes got this big. I mean, it was almost a physical response. I was lying in bed reading this. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Buddhist history. Buddha did this. Buddha went there. Buddha did that. Okay. And then it got to the Four Noble Truths, and I went, and I read it again, and I said, that's what I want to know. So that was my experience at 12 years old. And from then, I said, I'm a Buddhist. My parents, we went to church when we were younger. By that point, we had stopped going to church. But my parents never had my sisters or I baptized because they wanted us to choose for ourselves. So when I was 12 years old, I said, I'm a Buddhist. And they went, huh? That was sort of the response. Well, we went to a Methodist church. We thought choosing for yourself might mean Presbyterian or Lutheran, if you chose anything at all. So that was how I knew. And then, like I said, I would go to, we didn't have big bookstores back then, but there was a bookstore in one of the shopping malls, and I would go, and every now and then I would pick up a book, a Buddhist book, and I would read it.
Because I don't know if I'm the only one who's going this way, but I mean, I've grown up in a family who's Buddhist, and I know that I'm Buddhist, but I want to feel like I'm a Buddhist. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So there's sort of being culturally Buddhist and having this sort of feeling that it makes sense, but then not really having a lot of information, not really knowing about it, right? Yeah. So I'm glad you're here. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that. I remember when I was in Japan in high school, I didn't really speak that much Japanese. I was an exchange student, right? So I got credit from my American high school for like art class doing Chinese calligraphy and for PE, and they gave me a social studies credit just for living in Japan and experiencing a different culture, some things like that. But I was sitting in the classes with the other students, and I remember in their Japanese language class, like we do English here, right? The teacher assigned them an essay to write about their family's religion, which was overwhelmingly going to be Buddhist. And one of my friends raised his hand and he said, well, what if your family's not Buddhist? And the teacher said, well, have you ever been to a funeral for someone in your family? And he said, yes. And he said, like my grandfather. And then the teacher said, well, was there a Buddhist priest there chanting? And he said, yes. And then the teacher said, that means you're Buddhist. That's what it means to be Buddhist in Japan. You don't even really go for refuge. Lay people usually don't go for refuge. They don't know about that, it seems. They're just sort of born into it. So then the funny thing was, by that point I was able to write a little bit of Japanese, enough Japanese that I could write some very general things about Christianity because that was my family's traditional religion. But then my friends were turning to me saying, I don't know what kind of Buddhism my family is. And I said, well, have you ever heard your grandmother chanting? And he said, yeah, what was she chanting? I said, Nammu Amida Butsu, Nammu Ayidafat, right? Nammu Amida Butsu. I said, probably Pure Land Buddhism, some kind, probably, Jodo Shinshu, some kind of Pure Land Buddhism. And somebody else said something else. I said, it's probably this kind of Buddhism. So my Japanese friends were turning to me, the American exchange student, to figure out what to write about.
Because, that's all we've known.
Mm-hmm.
And it's confusing because some of my friends, they ask me questions and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. So what is your advice on, I guess, what other forms of practices to pursue, I don't know, into the Dharma? Like books or like, I don't know, I'm kind of lost.
I think both. There are different ways to enter the Dharma. You can enter the Dharma through meditation, through study, or through faith. Now, at this particular temple, a lot of people start coming to the temple because somebody in their family passes away, and the monks are invited to a funeral. And then we talk about a little bit of Dharma there at the funeral. And then they come here for the memorial chanting and all of that. And so they're sort of entering through faith a little bit. I started with books, so you could say that I started with study, but then there are other people who get really interested in meditation, and they come to a Buddhist temple or they go to a yoga class or something for meditation, and then they start to learn more about the Dharma, and then they sort of get the whole thing. But we really need all three. If you don't have faith in the Dharma, you won't pursue it. So you need a degree of faith. Faith here does not mean blind faith. When people born and raised in America hear faith, the word faith, particularly if they come from a Christian background like I do, they tend to think that means blind faith, believing without understanding, believing without knowledge, right? But here, that's not what we mean. But you do need sort of a natural affinity, like we have here in these 8 leisures and 10 endowments. You do need a natural affinity for the Dharma, so a certain degree of faith. And then if you just meditate, that's not enough, because then you don't know what you're meditating for. There's no context, no structure, right? Hello, Karuna. And then if you, but if you only study, well, you can't read your way to enlightenment. If all you do is accumulate knowledge, that's not enough. You really have to sit down and look at your mind. That's what practice is about. For example, even not just sitting in meditation, but when we do samhoi here at the temple, it's not just an empty ritual. This is what some people see when they see ritual. They just see people going blah, 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 blah in some funny language and bowing and bells ringing and things. That's not the point. When I can't keep up with the text, when we're doing all the chanting, I lose my place, or if I look away from the page, I can't remember what was just chanted because it's not a language that's familiar to me. You gonna come sit with me? So when we're actually bowing, the actual practice of confession is to remember, I have done things that are wrong. I recognize that, and I'm not going to do it again. So that's what I'm trying to focus on. When we're up there bowing and I'm hearing all the chanting, I'm thinking, even though I can't remember absolutely everything that I've done that is a cause of suffering for myself or for others, I'm reminding myself that I've done this. And if I can think of something specific, I bring that to mind. And then I'm thinking, and I'm really going to try to not do that again. That's the actual practice of confession. So we need all 3: study, practice, and faith. So my advice to you then, long story short, sorry about that, my advice to you is keep studying. So read books, listen to Dharma teachings, but also do whatever form of practice you like. If you really like sitting in meditation, if that draws you in, do it. Good. If you like bowing, do that. If you like walking meditation, if you like chanting, whatever you like, keep doing it. Yeah. And I think I said to someone a few weeks ago that, right now everyone has, well, to varying degrees, so you're just beginning, right, to study the Dharma. So you have, the Dharma is like a 10,000 piece puzzle and you have 10 pieces. So don't put too much pressure. Maybe two. Okay, two and a half. So don't put too much pressure on yourself, but keep studying. Keep studying. And a good thing to do is if your friends ask you questions, write them down, and then come here to the temple and ask one of the monks, and we'll try and help you figure it out. Because that's a good way for you to learn. Even if you never see that person again, to pass that information on to them, that's a good way for you to learn too. Yeah. Yes?
Is there a difference between mantras and tantras?
Mantras and tantras. Oh, okay. Mantras are usually short phrases that we repeat again and again. So, Namo Aidapa, Namo Aidapa, Namo Aidapa, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. These are mantras. There are actually longer mantras, like the Chudaibi, that we would call a dharani. It's Dharani, dharani, Dharani. These are longer mantras. There's no cutoff point, like there's no clear line that says this is just a regular mantra and this is a dharani, but generally longer ones are called dharani. And mantras and dharani are they don't necessarily make literal sense. If you translated it, sometimes it's just sound. Some pieces of it make sense grammatically, right? There's meaning that we can translate, but sometimes it's just sound. So those are mantras and dharani. Tantras are a kind of literature, like we have the 3 baskets right, in Buddhism. So there's the Vinaya basket, which is about morality. Mostly it's for monks and nuns, but there's also teachings on morals and ethics in there for lay people as well. Yeah. Then there's the Sutra basket, which is mostly that's the teachings of the Buddha. Yeah. Yeah. So, thank you. So mostly that's the teachings of the Buddha, although if we look at some of the sutras, they're not always taught completely by the Buddha. The Buddha is present, but someone else is teaching. Like I mentioned last time, I talked about the lion's roar of Queen Srimala. A lot of that is Queen Srimala explaining her understanding of the Dharma to the Buddha. So she's the one who's actually teaching. And the Buddha is saying, yes, that's right, yes, that's right. So that's the sutras. And then we have the commentaries. There's the Abhidharma. That's the third basket. And the Abhidharma takes things from the sutras. It's a lot of lists. It's a lot of lists of things. There's teachings about Buddhist psychology in there, that sort of thing. And it's a way that arose later. And it's a way mostly of explaining some difficult things in the sutras that aren't clearly defined and clearly explained. So those are the three baskets. But then in what we would call like esoteric Buddhism, sometimes you hear the term Vajrayana Buddhism. Mostly this is carried in the Tibetan tradition, mostly. They have tantras. It's another kind of literature. And this is... tantric practice has to do with... This is a little difficult to explain. Yeah, usually we talk about things like visualization. So if you're sitting in meditation and somebody's chanting Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, they're visualizing Kwanteam Botat, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva above and in front of them. Sometimes also in these tantric practices, you're visualizing yourself in the form of an enlightened being. And the idea, this is the fake it till you make it method. So by pretending in the meditation to be in the form of an enlightened being, you're trying to open up or reveal your Buddha nature. It's a method of practice. So the tantras are all about, I haven't read them because they're not easily accessible, but the tantras, as I understand it, are all about these kinds of practices. Now, there are other forms of Buddhism, regular forms of Mahayana, that will use visualization. So that usually one of the differences we say between this esoteric tantric Buddhism and regular Mahayana is empowerment. So in Tibetan Buddhism, and there are a couple of forms of Buddhism like this in Japan too, there's a ritual that you go through. It's like a purification ritual. So the guru, the lama, does this ritual that purifies your mind so that you can engage in the practice safely. That's usually one of the differences. Although I think in other forms of Buddhism where they use visualization, they don't do the self-visualization. You wouldn't visualize yourself in the form of an enlightened being. I think that is also unique to Tantric Buddhism. But the Tantras are those texts. Yeah. Okay. You all have so many questions, you don't know where to start, right? That's okay. Yes? Oh, yeah. Let me double check the time real quick, but yeah, we have time. Go ahead.
So these 8 teachers, can they, or at one point, can they become mentally like the animal? Can they,
so these like hell beings, hungry ghosts, and so on, yes. All of these realms, hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, humans, the asura or demigods, and the higher gods, these 6 realms, these are all part of cyclic existence. So beings in these realms all die at some point. And then depending on their karma, they're reborn again in the same or some other realm. So beings who are born in the hell realms are sort of burning away their bad karma, basically. Their bad karma became so heavy that it sort of pulled them down into the hell realms. But once they've burned off enough of that bad karma, they have nowhere to go but up. So it just depends. But all of these beings born in all of these 6 realms will eventually die and be reborn in another realm.
so you said they like
Yes, in this life, we have a human life. This is another thing to think about. Thank you for raising this point. This is another thing to think about. Right now, you might have a precious human life, but depending on what you do with it, who knows where you'll be born next? We don't know where we're going to go. Yep. Good point.
I have so many questions.
Why don't we do one more question? Go ahead.
Wait, you mentioned the higher gods. They're the ones that, enjoy the sweet symmetry from the lower...
The lower god realms, yeah.
Yes. So, how does one see that as a punishment? Or not punishment, but it's not good? I mean...
Well, it's... In a material sense, in terms of enjoying material things, the higher gods have it really good. In fact, it said in the god realms, if they want something, all they have to do is think of it, and it appears before them. So they can have anything they want. But the problem there is, because they're so overwhelmed with pleasure, what do I need to worry about suffering for? They can just party all the time. Now, it's said, of course, that they invite Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to teach, but for them, it's kind of like entertainment. And maybe they have faith in a sense in the Dharma, maybe, but then, the Buddha leaves and they're like, oh, what's to eat? So, yeah, that's why it's a problem being reborn in the higher realms. You're wasting your good karma. It's a waste of good karma. So I'll remind everyone, I've mentioned this in the past before, but saying a transfer of merit prayer, like at the end of our prayer book here on page 7, the offering merit prayer, whenever we do something like study or practice the Dharma, in fact, if you're just reading a Dharma book at home, when you're finished, this is a really good prayer to say. Because doing offering merit prayers, transfer of merit prayers, or dedication prayers they're called, what that does is it takes that good karma and it locks it away. It's like putting it in the bank. And then that merit fuels your own eventual enlightenment. But when we do good things and we don't do a transfer of merit prayer, then it comes back to us in the form of material wealth and other kinds of comfortable circumstances and that sort of thing. So we could say in a sense that all of us right now living in America, we have a relatively good life if you compare it to much of the rest of the world, right? This is the result of our undedicated good karma. You could make that argument. So we're basically using up our good karma. So it's really important to create more good karma and then to dedicate that for our enlightenment.
So you need to make as a habit to chant, because when I do work at home for the website, I don't remember. I just work it on it, but I don't pray to do the offering.
That would be a good thing to do. Start doing it. That would be a very good thing to do.
Temple, but when I come home, I just really complete.
People don't think about it. People don't think about it.
So it's not good not to do it.
Well, it's not bad, but whatever merit that you're accumulating from doing, say, work on the website for the temple, volunteering at the temple or whatever, it could be wasted. It could be wasted if you don't do these transfer of merit prayers. Now, come to think of it, I've heard other teachers who will say, well, if you do something for the Dharma directly, it's automatically dedicated. I've heard that statement also, so don't worry about it too much. But just in case,
I will put
it right on top of your computer, right? But anytime you do something good, anytime you engage in an act of generosity, sometimes I'll get like a milkshake or cookies at the McDonald's drive-thru. Cookies, that's my thing, as you can tell. So I go get cookies, and the one here on Valley, they've got a box on the outside wall where you can drop your change in, and it goes to the Ronald McDonald House. Right? So I drop my change in there, and as I'm driving around to get my cookies, I'll think to myself, may this merit be of benefit to all beings, or something. A very simple, it's not exactly this prayer, but it's a very simple dedication prayer. So whenever we engage in generosity or do something good, it's good to think, okay, may the merit from this act of generosity or whatever, may it be of benefit to all sentient beings. May it help me achieve enlightenment so that I can benefit all sentient beings, or something like that. Yeah. I forget a lot of the time too, monk though I am. I'm busy running around, You know, my friend's hungry. I give him some food that I've got, and I'm like, okay, I'll see you later. And I get in my car, and then I think, oh, wait.
Yeah, I heard a lot from going away, but I never make effort to do it.
Yeah.
It just, and my Buddhist friends too keep telling me, but I just, okay, you know, it's sad to me, it's not important, but I think it makes sense. So
Right, right.
I don't want to waste all the karma.
Don't waste the good karma, folks.
If it's the act that is important, why is it necessary to study the merit? Because your act that you're doing something good for something.
Right.
Why does it need a way to lock things in? I mean, that's the part that I just.
Okay. Because if you don't direct that merit for your enlightenment, towards your enlightenment, for the benefit of all sentient beings, you still have the merit. Well, two things. You have the merit, and it will either come back to you in the form of someone else being generous to you, or you having like comfortable material circumstances, or the other thing that can happen with your merit is it can be destroyed. A single act of anger can destroy vast amounts of merit. And so when we do things that are not good, that create negative karma, not only are we creating that negative karma, it's also taught that we are destroying some of the merit that we've created. So that's the other reason. Right.
So the opposite of that is if you act something bad, that's destroyed. But so when you do something good, that isn't that act alone. It's sort of like it should apply both ways, either you do good or bad. It's the act alone that should be sufficient, rather than we need like another step, sort of.
I see what you're saying. So if you, let's say I make an offering to the temple of $100, okay? I've generated the merit. The merit has been generated. And so that act is enough to create the merit, but to keep that merit and use it for our enlightenment, we need to say a dedication prayer. Do you see what I mean? That's the difference. It's not that you do the act and you say the prayer and then you have the merit. It's not like there's a two-step process to create merit. It's a one-step process to create merit. You make the offering, you've created the merit, the good karma. But then locking it away so that you can keep it to help fuel your eventual enlightenment, you need to say a transfer of merit prayer. If you don't, maybe that merit will come back to you in the form of material wealth, or you get angry or you create some sort of negative karma and it wipes out that merit. Do you see what I mean? That's the difference. It's like if I earn $100 and I set it, right, putting it in the bank versus spending it, or putting it in the bank versus putting it on a rock outside. Well, if I put that $100 on a rock outside, it's not going to help me with anything, right? The rain and the wind will destroy it, or someone will come by and take it, or it'll blow away, or whatever. Or you spend it on candy and whatever, cookies at McDonald's, or whatever, right? That's the difference. Is that clear now? Kind of?
Saving and spending.
It's saving versus spending, yeah. That's an easy way to think of it.
I think I can understand a bit better now that you wish that all the beings can have the same merit that you just generate.
Mm-hmm.
So they can get the merit for themselves as well, not just you. It's not like you share the benefits to others.
Well, that's the mind that we're cultivating. That is the mind that we're cultivating when we say a transfer of merit prayer. But again, there is some difference in the Buddhist world. If I engage in an act of generosity, if I create merit, can I literally give it to you? Right? That's one question. And some people say yes, and other people say no. My personal opinion is that if I could literally transfer my merit to Nyat Ba Kwak, then the Buddha, who has infinite stores of merit, would have transferred all of that merit to us eons ago, and there would be no more samsara, no more suffering. We would all be enlightened. That's what I meant, I think, last week or the week before when I said if the Buddha could give us enlightenment, he would have already. But that hasn't happened. So that tells me that we don't literally transfer our merit. It's not transferring from my mind to his mind, that imprint of the karma. It isn't transferring from my mind to his mind. The way it actually works is I'm saying a prayer in which I say, I want to share this merit with all of you. But what that does, that merit actually does, is it fuels my own enlightenment. Partly because I'm imprinting upon my mind the generosity, the tendency to be generous. Yeah, bodhicitta, right? I'm cultivating bodhicitta by saying a transfer of merit prayer. It's a kind of bodhicitta prayer. So that fuels my own enlightenment. And then when I am enlightened, that's how my merit helps other people. So it's indirect. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes.
I think if I'm not wrong, I think her point is, I understand your example, like if we donate $100 and we want to transfer that merit to everyone, like hopefully that they benefit the same way, like achieve enlightenment as whatever. But another thing, I think her point is when we do good things, we should not remind ourselves all about it all the time, because there is a saying I read somewhere. It said the one who receives a good merit should always remember it, but the one who do the merit should not remember it. So like by just keep thinking, oh, I'm a good person and do good thing all the time. It's kind of like a little bit destroying your good karma. You know what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Yes. If I engage in an act of generosity, I don't walk around the temple and say, I've just engaged in this act of generosity. Watch me say the prayer now. Is everyone listening? I'm going to say the prayer now. Yeah, we don't want to do that. If we approach it that way, we're not really generating that much merit, right? But if we quietly engage in good acts, and then in our own minds, I hope that this merit will benefit all sentient beings. If we think like that, that's good. Without pride.
No self.
Right.
No self, anatta.
Yes.
The action like for the other being, not for us, ourselves, but for the other. That's the way.
Right.
The Dharma.
Right.
That bodhicitta work for the other, not for ourselves.
Well, it works for both. It works for both. So, and another way to think about this is if we do remind ourselves, oh, I've just engaged in this act of generosity, that's a good thing. That might be motivation for us to continue to do that. Do you see? It can go both ways, though. I see what you mean. It could go both ways. It could be, I've engaged in an act of generosity. I'm so fantastic and everyone else should know it. That's no good. But if I engage in an act of generosity and I think, okay, I've been able to generate this merit, I want to do that again. That's not bad. That's not a problem. But I think I see what you're saying now. Yes. So we have to watch our minds and not be prideful. Okay. Very good questions again. Thank you. So we'll stop here and we'll begin our meditation practice.